episode of the Council Connection podcast, the #1 podcast on Apple Podcasts about Alexandria city politics by members of the Alexandria City Council.
Although, given that we are the city of Alexandria, it's kind of surprising that there aren't more competitors. Welcome, welcome to our second episode.
Form.
That's true. That's true. But welcome to our second episode. We're glad to have you back. And we look forward to mixing up the format a bit this time. We are going to be going over our 3 March meetings, 2 legislative and multiple public hearings related to the budget and other topics. And we'll also have our first interview in this episode with City Manager Jim Parajon.
So that's coming up after the meeting update. So please, stay tuned for that.
We are going to also cover our first question that we received. Thank you so much to our listeners for sending them in. We got some comments via 311 with requests for future episodes, and we got a question. And I'm going to read the question and then kick to my co-host for the answer. At Judd Lumberjack asked us, when assessing property tax for commercial property, how is the element of economic activity determined? Kirk.
So I ran this by our amazing revenue staff here in the city, and I got a response back that it is incredibly, incredibly complicated, and that it varies from type to type of commercial facility. But if you're talking about just sort of a general 1,000-foot view of how this works, is that economic activity at a site determines in some ways the lease values of the properties on the site, and the lease values of the properties, just like rent values of properties in apartment buildings, impact the assessment that the site receives when we are determining its value for taxation purposes. So when you see a shopping center that is full of stores that are just slammed busy and excited with people going in and out all the time, like over off of Seminary Road where the French baguette place has gone in, Paris Baguette, that shopping center is a lot less sleepy than it was a year ago. I imagine you're going to see that level of economic activity impact the leases for spaces in that shopping center, and that will in turn impact future tax revenues that we receive from it. And also, Paris Baguette is awesome. If you haven't been yet, you should definitely check it out.
I was going to say, I definitely contributed to the economic activity of that strip mall yesterday when I had a ham and cheese croissant on my way to our town hall.
And there's an urgent care facility in that shopping center as well now, which is nice, though I really miss my dry cleaners. They were there, and losing them was tough.
Well, to have a croissant to soothe the pain.
It does do so much to make you feel just a little bit better. It has that certain je ne sais quoi.
Oh, wow. Wow. Well, with that, thank you for the question from our Blue Sky followers, and we look forward to answering other questions in the future. I'm now going to kick it back to Kirk to talk about our first legislative meeting in March.
Yeah, we had our first legislative meeting on March 11th, and like all of our first legislative meetings, we started with boards and commission appointments. We discussed that a little bit last month, and please go to the Alexandria City website, alexandriava.gov. If you would like to serve your city in a board or commission capacity, please sign up. We always have vacancies, and we are voting on those things every single month. And then I spend most of the month signing letters and writing notes to people who got elected, which is always great. And then the first major content of our meeting on March 11th was actually our General Assembly session update. Our legislative staff came and talked to us about the things that the city cared about and how they fared in the General Assembly legislative session. Since we now exist in the future, unlike the versions of us that were at that meeting, we also know, unfortunately, how the governor responded to some of the things that passed out of the General Assembly this year. We got some advancements on automated traffic enforcements, which were passed out of the General Assembly, but just straight up vetoed by the governor. The local bill that was very important to many Alexandrians to allow local authority to require inspections of animal boarding facilities passed the General Assembly with solid margins and basically got vetoed by the governor. He sent it back with an amendment that basically turns it into a study and asks that a committee be formed to study the issue because he does think it's very important. But if you feel unsafe leaving your pet at a boarding facility in Alexandria at any point in the next year, you can thank Governor Youngkin for that. The bill that we were supporting for local right of first refusal and affordable housing passed with some changes. This is important to Alexandria. We want to have that option to jump in and grab these properties and be able to maintain affordability on them. The governor disagreed and vetoed that as well.
I sense a theme.
Yes. The 1% sales tax option, which allowed us to increase our sales tax to provide direct funding to school construction. Anybody who's active in Alexandria politics knows that we've been putting a ton of money into school construction in the last decade, and this little sales tax option, 1%, would have helped us, cover that cost within our CIP, and it passed out of the General Assembly just like it did last year, and died on the governor's desk just like it did last year. I'm thinking that some of these bills might have a slightly different fate in about 12 months. Who knows? We'll see. The electoral gods giveth and taketh. Some other elements that we care about regarding WMATA funding and Douglas Cemetery made it into the budget, and we're waiting to see how the budget negotiations are going to come out between the governor and the General Assembly.
Yeah, it's an important point that you make about it's always an election year in Virginia, and this year is no different. And so many of the bills that we saw at least advance, we're optimistic will be raised again next year, and hopefully with a different governor would have a different outcome on the governor's desk. So we'll continue to push for those things. Another piece of good feedback that we got during our legislative update was that Alexandria's advocacy was really well received by many others in the region, and we've been invited back, council members and our staff, to continue to collaborate in the year ahead on issues like housing and school construction that we were passionate about and we want to see action on.
Yeah, we had some very effective guidance from our staff this year as we were going down to talk about our local priorities. We had opportunities to speak before the committees that were hearing these bills. It's one of the big things we do in the late winter is go down and advocate for the city in Richmond. And it was effective this year on the General Assembly, and we're going to keep working at it. These are important priorities, and we want to see them advance all the way into law. We also had an update from Carl Moritz, our sadly retiring planning and zoning director, who's going to leave some very big shoes to fill in a few months. He gave an update on an ordinance to improve cross-departmental operations in the city. And the idea behind this ordinance is that if somebody from code compliance is out inspecting a property or responding to a constituent call about an issue, and they see an issue that is technically not in their wheelhouse, but they would have to actually go back to City Hall and get someone from TESS to go out and address that issue, we're giving the city manager the authority to allow for cross-departmental operations where people who are out there on the field will be able to be, deputized after a fashion by another department to also deal with the issues under that silo. It's an attempt to make the city's responses to resident concerns more nimble and more comprehensive. And it is not an attempt to give dictatorial power to our podcast guest this evening, Jim Parajon.
No, I think deputy directors and deputy city managers will still very much remain in the operational flow. But more importantly, for our residents, they won't have to contact multiple departments when they're having issues with neighbors or businesses or with the conditions at a site around them. So we're hoping to see some real operational efficiencies for staff's benefit and for the residents in the city.
Yeah, this is going to really improve the day-to-day experience, I think, of being a resident in Alexandria who has an issue with the city. And if you're a city employee, it won't change anything. Your boss is still your boss. Your reporting structure is still your reporting structure, except that you won't face that frustration when you go out to help a resident and you find out that actually this is not a TESS issue. This is a code compliance issue, and I can't actually help you with that. Now the people that we hire who really want to help our residents will be able to help our residents, even if it's not necessarily in their wheelhouse. Following that, we had a brief discussion of the tax rate, and I think we can move on from there.
It was a relatively brief discussion, and hopefully provided some relief and some ease to our listeners. This year, there was a brief discussion about whether or not to advertise an increase in the real estate property tax rate. And drum roll, Mr. McPike, would you like to reveal what our final conclusion was on that topic?
We did not advertise an increased rate for the residential or commercial property taxes. So the rate that you paid last year will be the rate that you will pay this year. Obviously, the amount that you pay may change if you have seen your assessment shift, which most of us do. But given the instability and challenges facing our community, which we got a real deep look at in the March 25th meeting, we wanted to be a rock stability and not raise that rate this year. Now, this wasn't, we often get questions about why does the council always vote unanimously on everything. This actually wasn't a unanimous vote. There's always good arguments for advertising a slightly higher rate than you tend to actually end up putting in place to make the process of, putting together those budget add deletes a bit easier. Every budget of the last council, we advertised a higher rate, and only 1 year did we end up actually raising the tax rate. But we used that, leeway to give us room to sort of consider things during the budget. This year, we wanted to be very, the majority of us wanted to be very cautious and very clear to residents and to communicate very carefully that we are trying to, be as stable as possible. So 4 of us did vote to advertise the rate as is. 3 people, they didn't really want to raise the rate, but they wanted to advertise a little higher. And we had that discussion. You can go back and watch it on the city website if you'd like.
Yes, it was a 4-3 vote. There was some good discussion about the pros and cons of the advertising. But one thing I want to emphasize for the listeners as well, and this came up yesterday at our town hall, is you may individually see a higher tax bill despite the rate not being changed if the property you live in has increased in value over last year. And because you live in Alexandria, a fabulous place to live, the odds are that property value did go up where you live. So your tax bill itself might be higher this year, but that is related to property value and not a rate change. And the other bit of information I think that's important is those assessments have already gone out. We have already fixed the amount of real estate property and commercial property tax we're going to collect this year. So regardless of what happens sort of with property values over the next year, we know what those incomes will be. And so we're able to budget, for FY26 accordingly. And though we will be facing the repercussions of any drops in value in FY27, we can sort of move forward in this budget knowing that those assessments were based on Jan 1, 2025, and we can move forward in FY26 accordingly. The last thing I think I would mention, do we want
I was just going to agree with you that you do sometimes see the change in the tax bill. It's a little bit like the income tax. Even if the rate doesn't change, but your income goes up, your tax might go up a little bit. And, this time, though, we are not changing the rate.
Exactly.
And you want, I think, to discuss the housing master plan, right?
Yeah. It was just the last thing that we got a little update on. It was the housing master plan process, which we are currently in. There's a great homepage on the city website. You can just Google Alexandria VA housing master plan, and it brings up that link. But one of the good data points I thought I would pass along to those interested and who have been following a lot of housing related issues in the city is that we actually did mail a piece of mail about the housing master plan process to 90,000 residential addresses in the fall of last year. So while we are using pop-ups and events at rec centers and QR codes and surveys and all sorts of other means to involve people, we did include an additional method, which was a classic mailer to all those addresses.
I appreciate you mentioning that. The issue of how we reach out to folks also came up at the town hall yesterday. And we really are, as a city, making a concerted effort to reach out to people in new and inventive ways. We are on every social media platform. We are putting in place talking bus stops to inform people of things about Duke Street on Motion. We're doing pop-ups, outreach to specific communities, and as well as mailers and normal emails and advertisements on the city website. But we're always, of course, looking for new ways to reach out to residents and get out the word about what Alexandria is doing. So if you'd like to be involved in the housing master plan, please do check out the city website. This is going to be an important document that's going to help us guide the decisions our council and future councils are going to make to help us achieve our housing goals and address the severe housing crisis we are facing in this region.
my colleague Kirk here actually gave a great answer on how blue states have sort of unwittingly limited the development of housing in the past few decades, and how cities like Austin and others are really making some substantive changes, the kind of changes we might be considering in our housing master plan, to really get going in terms of building housing, creating more housing, and contributing to that filtering effect, which we know sort of allows more people to find housing at the price point that's right for them. So you can also check out the town council hall meeting where some of these issues are discussed as well. So we'll move on to public hearings. We've had some extras this month. Not satisfied with just our standard third Saturday public hearing, we also threw in an additional public budget hearing, which took place on March 10th. And then we had at our public hearing an extra public hearing about the budget. So we have been hearing from people all over town in many ways on many days this month, between the town hall, the extra hearing, and the extra session within our hearing. A lot of the same issues actually come up, though, in all of these contexts, whether it's at the town hall or in these special sessions. We heard about our schools and how are we going to try to, fund and address retention of teachers and the special needs in our schools. We heard a lot about DASH and infrastructure, and not just maintaining DASH, but how can we expand it, since we know how valuable it is to economic involvement and participation, to safety, to climate goals. We heard a lot about parades.
We did.
We had several speakers come in to talk about the GW parade and how that parade is funded, and asking us to do an analysis on that. We heard about small business, an area that is of real focus this year, and we'll touch on that towards the end as well, is economic development. And part of that economic development in the city has to include our small business community. And so we heard from small business owners about what are we doing in this budget to support small businesses. And I know Kirk and I are doing some work in that area and may have some ideas. We heard from representatives from the Parks Commission. Thank you for coming in to talk about our Parks Improvement Plan. And we heard from many, many members of our community about housing. We heard from tenants and workers. We heard from Voice. We heard from individuals who are just expressing how difficult it is to hold on to their place in our community, and asking us to do more on housing. Any other topics or areas that stuck out for you?
Well, paired with housing, most folks who came to speak to us about housing also brought up the Arise program, which was a very good program the city put together using ARPA dollars to test a sort of universal basic income model for supporting folks in our city who need a little bit extra help. It was always planned to be a temporary pilot program. And in fact, in this year's budget, because of an amendment made last year by then council member, now Vice Mayor Bagley, we extended the program and sort of tapered it off so that the families who were randomly selected to receive the benefit didn't just get sort of dropped off a fiscal cliff there. It is a program that is winding down, but we learned a lot from it. The data scientists that we were working with, who were going to be writing papers about these sort of larger questions of UBI and advocating for it on a larger scale, learned a lot. But we as a city, I think, learned that flexible dollars, is really valuable to folks who are in need of help. A lot of what we give people is in the form of basically vouchers for housing, vouchers for food, vouchers for medication, or subsidies that go directly to entities they're interacting with and don't go through people's accounts themselves. But there is a lot of value in this sort of flexible, option or model. And I think we've learned from it. I think it'll take time for us to figure out how to better apply those lessons to some of the benefits we have in the city. And if we want to make a real difference with it, it'll take time to get support from the state who actually provides a lot of the sort of human resource support dollars that we use in Alexandria to give us that sort of flexibility. But I think it's something that you and I are both interested in pursuing.
It's certainly whether or not we're able to fund it in this budget
Yeah.
or in a long-term way. It's a concept that I think we need to start applying and evaluating, and in every way that we deliver services
Hmm.
is what are ways that we can streamline, combine, lower overhead and administrative burdens, and allow people to put their resources where they're most needed on a month-to-month basis. There's both a real dignity to that. There's a mental health benefit. And what we generally are seeing is people are using it towards housing, using it towards food, using it towards healthcare. So the report on the pilot, which will wind down at June 30th of this year as currently budgeted, it'll take quite a while actually to review 2 years worth of data, but we should be getting a really robust report. And I appreciate you bringing it up, and I appreciate all the advocates in the community who continue to speak up about this program. It's certainly something I hope this council over its 3-year term can continue to talk about and investigate and find our way forward, hopefully with a state or federal partner as a funding source. Beyond the budget and those items and the many public speakers we heard from, the other big ticket item considered at our public hearing was revisions and amendments to the Beauregard Small Area Plan, a CDD within the now sort of retired Beauregard Small Area Plan. So to back up, do a little bit of quick history here. The Beauregard Small Area Plan was actually adopted back in 2012 and rezoned back in 2013. So I think 30 Rock was still on the air then, for anybody
Yes,
keeping.
2013 was the last. In May 2013 was when that show went off the air.
So that's how I count time. How long has it been since 30 Rock went off the air? But it was adapted quite a while ago, and the realities of that small area plan is that very little has been built and executed. Essentially, the Blake,
Yep.
which exists and you can go by and see it, is really the only development that fully came to fruition from the Beauregard Small Area Plan. There's some townhomes that were approved, but ultimately, the Alexandria West Small Area process absorbed the Beauregard area. And what we did on Saturday in that public hearing was to apply the new elements of the Alexandria West Small Area Plan, things regarding open space, things regarding green building policies, housing policies, transportation management plans, to sort of bring that area in line with the larger AlexWest plan. So our hope is that Alexandria West will bring housing. Alexandria West will bring more open space. It will have a more environmental consciousness in its approach. It will have a transit-oriented approach. And what we needed to do on Saturday was bring a CDD that had been created and approved under the Beauregard plan in line with the AlexWest plan. There was one specific area that had to be addressed in terms of open space, but really this was mostly a clerical issue. And we do anticipate big projects and big developments coming forward, including Southern Towers in the years ahead. And by Southern Towers, I don't want to make anybody nervous and hear this wrong. Southern Towers will remain a lot of housing and very committed to creating more housing in that area and to creating more open space and an improved transit zone. But that was the primary work of the council in terms of land use at that public hearing. The last wrinkle in that conversation was we are retiring what's called the BDAC, which is an advisory commission, which used to weigh in on developments in the Beauregard Small Area Plan. And there was a good dialogue about what's going to replace it. So I would encourage everybody who lives in that area, who lives in the Alexandria West Small Area Plan, to participate as opportunities come forward to speak out publicly and give your feedback on proposals in that area, because what had been sort of the corridor specific advisory group has been retired as of this point in the Beauregard area.
I think what's important to take away from this whole process is how seriously we take our small area plans. We had a small area plan in the Beauregard district that was done with a lot of hopefulness and a lot of careful intention, and it didn't work out the way that we were hoping as a city. It didn't actually lead to the sorts of things that we put into the plan being, created. And so we went back and we looked at it again and we sort of expanded the zone. We folded everything together into this AlexWest process. But because we had already defined some very important goals in Beauregard. We integrated those into that AlexWest process, and now we're sort of, with this change to this coordinated developmental district, kind of looping those all back together to ensure that we'll both be in sync with the larger AlexWest project, but using the AlexWest project to try to get the things we were always trying to help the community achieve through the Beauregard Small Area Plan. So the planning staff that works on these does just a lot of Herculean effort to not only reach out to the public, but to try to think into the future, which can be very hard, particularly at times when finances and sort of the or larger structures of government policy are in flux. And so I'm very happy that we made this amendment to continue to try to push the now Beauregard part of the AlexWest Small Area Plan forward, and we will continue to look at all of our small area plans to make sure that the residents who helped us, create them are getting the things that they are hoping for from the processes that we put in place.
And kudos to my colleague here for explaining what the acronym stands for. I appreciate that.
I try to do it without calling it out.
No. Well, now I'm calling it out because I realize we can often talk in jargon. So kudos to my colleague for explaining what a CDD actually is and stands for. And with that, I will hand it back to my colleague to lead us into our final legislative meeting of the month of March.
Yeah, a CDD is an element that has SUPs within it that takes place underneath the umbrella of an SAP. So,
and it's all subject to the HMP.
It is.
Oh man!
If it can get funded in the CIP.
Oh wow! All right, I know the gauntlet thrown. How can I top that? I can't OMB, and it's got to be approved by the Office of OMB.
There you go. Yep. All right. I will. All right. I will give you the crown on that because we have to get through the second legislative meeting to get to our interview with the head of the CMO.
Touché, sir.
The second legislative meeting. It wasn't a lot of laughs. The second legislative meeting on March 25th. The bulk of the meeting was dominated by two presentations that didn't quite give me a panic attack up on the dais, but it was pretty stark. It was an update from Clark Mercer, Alexandria resident and head of the Washington Area Council of Governments, and one of our leaders from the Northern Virginia Regional Commission, who came to talk to us about the impacts on Alexandria specifically that could come from the stated goals and action and plans that are being turned into actions of the new administration in Washington. And some of the impacts, if they really do achieve the things that they want to achieve, could be stark on our city. The Department of Government Efficiency, which is not really creating any efficiency, nor technically is a government department, has said that it wants to slash 75% of the federal workforce, which is, unthinkable. That's very difficult for us to hear. We have 13,000 federal employees in our city who do great work on behalf of the American people and work from every department and agency, from federal law enforcement to the FTC to USAID and every department in between. NIH.
I think some of the scarier impacts too are in the area of public health. I mean, obviously Social Security Administration. I'm concerned about what I keep hearing with flights and near misses and, the oversight of that structure. So It really touches everything. All elements of our lives, our food, our healthcare, our roads, our flights. Yes. Nothing is sort of being spared at the moment from these really rather careless feeling cuts.
Yeah. If they were to actually complete them, we would likely have an unemployment rate regionally, and Alexandria tends to trend with the region on its unemployment rate of almost 10%. For comparison's sake, Alexandria's employment rate right now is a little over 2%, and that is about where it's been for several years. The General Services Administration is talking about putting on the market hundreds of buildings around the nation, including several in the DMV area, just to sell off government office buildings, cashing out important resources for one-time bursts of money that can be, spent frivolously by the majority in Congress. If they did that, that could significantly impact commercial property values in Northern Virginia. We in Alexandria have been struggling with this locally, and we, I think, discussed at length about this on our last podcast, or if not, we just talked about it so much that I think we did. But the commercial values versus our residential values, and the difficulty we have in sort of getting that commercial share of our revenue up. Well, that'd be a lot harder if there was a glut of commercial buildings put on the market. In fact, a lot of the challenges we had with commercial space over the last couple of years has been because of the U.S. Patent and Trade Office downsizing its square footage in a building that it has here in Alexandria.
It's interesting. We that building represented a substantial piece of vacancy, which we have managed to counteracted with our renovation of 5001 Eisenhower, the Victory Center, which stood vacant for over 20 years, I believe, which will be converting to housing. So unfortunately, our commercial vacancy rate is going to stay roughly the same, just, with the conversion, but with the loss at PTO. But we're going to have to continue that kind of conversation with our commercial spaces, especially if there's going to be more of them or their value will decline in light of these sales.
Yep. 70% of all hospitality in our region, and hospitality means food services. It means, the people who organize things, deliver speakers and, sell decorations, all of that. 70% of that is tied to federal government activity or activities meant to interact with the federal government. Even if we don't see the 75% slashing of the federal workforce, which I personally think is impossible, you're already seeing the courts putting the brakes on a lot of what they're trying to do. And in most cases, the administration is appealing as opposed to ignoring court decisions, which is so far okay. Like, that's what you're supposed to do. It's tense times. Even a 10% cut in the federal workforce could cause a $300 million shortfall in restaurant revenues across our region. And 40% of restaurant owners in this region who responded to a poll by, I believe, the D.C. Chamber of Commerce said that they think there's a high likelihood that they will close in the next year. And, we're in the middle of election season in Virginia, as Sarah said, and some people want to be minimizing the impacts of these federal actions on Virginia as a commonwealth. But there are 300,000 federal workers in Virginia. There are 400,000 people who work for federal contractors in Virginia. And 47% of all Virginia income tax revenue comes from Northern Virginia. So when we're talking about these impacts, we have to think of them as a city. But everyone in Virginia needs to be thinking about these things, because this is going to impact our capacity as a state to do a lot of the things that we care about. We talked, I think, a little bit last month in our discussion of the city budget that we are sort of putting in place some cushions to try to protect against shortfalls in sales tax revenues, meals tax revenues, federal grant funding that we're expecting. And there's about $4 million in general fund balances that have been set aside for this emergency use by the city manager. That's useful. That's smart and prudent for him to have done. There's a chance that we're going to need more than that we're going to have to be reopening the budget that we're spending a lot of time discussing now this fall, because we're not seeing the revenues that we're expecting, or we're seeing an increase in demand on the social services that we provide, because while callous cuts may be made by people in D.C., we as a city are not going to allow members of our community to just fall through the cracks and become victims here. We have services that we provide. We put resources on our city website up to help federal workers who might be facing displacement, to help people whose immigration status may make them at risk of targeting by this administration. And we're not going to back down from that. But we may face some really tough fiscal realities even after passing this budget, because $51 million of funding between Alexandria City Public Schools and the City of Alexandria's budgets comes from federal grants and programs. Looking at the schools, the federal government pays for the things that you absolutely, at the core of our being, we cannot allow to falter. It's food for breakfast and lunch for children who can't afford it. It's special education resources for the students who need extra help keeping at pace with their peers, or individual learning plans to help them achieve the most that they can in life. And we're not going to let these things collapse, but our capacity to take on all of that cost is going to be limited. And it might mean that when we come back facing some hard choices in the autumn.
You stole a few of my talking points there, sir, but well done. I had jotted down the $51 million. That was mentioned yesterday, again, during our town hall. The mayor brought that up in the context of we can be prudent, we can set aside reserves, but the reality is we don't have $51 million in reserves. And between the loss of potential federal grants, the decline in commercial and occupancy and other meals taxes that might happen, it's why I think you're seeing, during this budget process, so much caution, from all of us, and the use of the word uncertainty repeatedly. So, it was not a very, there weren't a lot of laughs, and it did kind of have us all sort of looking at each other with sort of big eyes, throughout the presentation. There was also NVRC, the Northern Virginia Regional Coalition was there, Commission was there, with a demographer who gave some good insights about unemployment statistics and how they are tracked and how they are reported and what they will be telling us in the months ahead. So we will obviously be keeping an eye on all of that. We will continue to collaborate with our jurisdictional partners. Congressman Beyer has been really excellent about bringing together all the localities within his congressional district. So, please keep an eye on all of that. But know that so much of that presentation is sort of soaking into the council's bones, I think, in this budget process, and maybe why we are potentially less inclined to, fund additional positions that we may not be able to fund next year, or expand Dash. I mean, you and I, since joining council, have expanded Dash every year so far. We've been able to expand service in some way, and this might be the first year where we can't do that. So, we remain committed to those values, but we really want to be as cautious and prudent as we can in this process. So thank you for kind of giving us that bleak and fact-filled overview, my friend.
Yeah.
It's good. It's valuable information. And even if you don't sit through the presentation, there's a slide deck available on the council docket that you can flip through.
I think it's important to note that it's going to be hard. It's going to be hard, but we knew this. We've known this since November, and we've been preparing. You can only do so much to prepare, but, the only way out is through. We are going to get through this as a city, as a country, and it's going to take a lot of work to protect the things that we care about the most. But I am confident in Alexandria that we have the will and the support of the public to do the things that we need to do to minimize as much as we can the impacts of federal actions on our local population. Sometimes that won't be a lot, but sometimes just being able to do the small things that we can will mean a great deal to the people most directly impacted. But it's, I'm trying to come up with something to not end this on such a downer of a note. But I do think it's a stark situation that we're facing, but, we are committed to finding a way through it as a city.
No, I think the way we'll get through it as a city is, again, why you and I have both chose this as our home. Neither of us are native Alexandrians. We are both chosen Alexandrians, and I think we chose it for some of the reasons that we saw during COVID, for example, is that we are, as a community, able to adapt and respond and support each other. And the council during COVID came up with outdoor dining on the fly and takeaway alcoholic beverages, and senior services brought their network together to figure out how to get food to kids at home, because they knew how to get food to seniors at home. So they helped pitch in. Senior services had their whole facility burned down, and they didn't miss a day. So something we're very good at in Alexandria is fighting on and keeping calm and carrying on and all of that. So that's what we'll continue to do. I will highlight a great example of a way to do that. On April 9th is Spring to Action, and it's sort of our citywide philanthropic day. And you can pull up the Spring to Action site and see all of the nonprofits in the city that are available. You can search by topic area. If you want to support art or dogs or youth or seniors, you can find all the organizations that do that work. So I wanted to highlight that date coming up. I also want to give a quick overview of the remaining budget process. We have add deletes from the council members are due on April 3rd. Then on April 8th, we will have a specific budget hearing, first on the add deletes, then on sort of generalized budget topics. We will have our standard public hearing on April 26th. And then on April 30th, we will pass the budget one way or another. With potentially some add deletes. One other item that I wanted to mention that took place this month that we've referred to a few times is our council town hall. My colleague helped bring this forward. I know it was an issue, an item that the council just before us, Councilman Aguirre, had sort of started the discussion on, and we carried it forward, got it budgeted, got it scheduled. So we had our first town hall of the year at the Del Pepper Center yesterday. We took about 60 questions, both online and in the audience. We answered every question that came in just over 2 hours. Actually, Kirk circulated a great memo sort of setting out the process for scheduling these moving forward. So we should have a nice fixed schedule, but it's just another example of how we are trying to be available and responsive and answer questions, including this podcast, another way to talk about what we're doing and hear our thoughts on them. Any other comment, Kirk, on sort of the town hall or the budget process?
The folks who came out to the town hall, were asking questions about our schools, about housing, about the challenges that we're facing as a city, but they're all questions about solving problems, not just sort of lingering in problems and throwing our hands up about them. And I appreciate that. Also, last night after the town hall was the Senior Services of Alexandria Gala. And you mentioned them a little bit in your wrap-up of the last meeting, but as we're facing a challenging time nationally and we look locally for ways to make a difference and hold the line, I think groups like Senior Services are what we have to highlight. It's not just they do great work, it's that you as a person in Alexandria can be a part of that work. I think both Sarah and I went this month and did Meals on Wheels, delivering food to seniors in need here in Alexandria. It's a wonderful program. They are always in need of volunteers, but because this is Alexandria, they always get it done every single day. The people who signed up to get these meals, who need that support, get it every single day because Alexandrians come together, they support each other, and if you want to take your mind off of challenges at the national level, if you want to get involved locally, but you don't necessarily feel inspired by any of our many boards and commissions, so many boards and commissions and ways to be involved in the city, please take a look at groups like Social Services of Alexandria. Take a look at groups like Alive, who are going to need more help and more people and more hands to keep things going as we sort of respond to and eventually overcome the challenges coming to us right now. And the town hall is great, so please come to our next town hall. We're going to have one every single quarter, and we want to hear your questions. But right now, we want you to hear our questions for City Manager Jim Parajon. So we're going to go to our interview with Jim, and then we will be back after that to wrap up this episode. And now we're going to be doing our interview with City Manager James Parajon, who joined the city around the same time that Sarah and I did in 2022. Jim, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks for being here.
Yeah. So we just want to have a conversation about, your role in the city and the thing that's kind of on the minds of everyone in the city who's paying attention to Alexandria government, which is
the budget.
The budget. So, Jim, what exactly does a city manager do aside from tell me which city staff member I'm supposed to send my questions to?
That's a great question, and let me help educate our public. The city manager's job in our form of government is really intended to execute on the council priorities and the community's interests. So my job is to run the operations of the city, and one key of that is to prepare a proposed budget that allows for the council priorities to be executed upon successfully.
Thanks for that answer. It's been fascinating to me. I think
when I joined council, you came on, I think, 2 or 3 weeks later. And so I feel like we've learned and grown in the position together. So this is our 4th budget together. Is that right?
Yes.
And so what has surprised you the most in your 3 years and change working in Alexandria?
Another really strong question. I think, and I've said this in my time spending with the neighborhoods and the community members, when I go out and speak about different topics that are relevant to the community, the specialness of our residents, the caring spirit, but also the knowledge base. This is a highly knowledgeable resident population. They care deeply about a multitude of issues, and so that's something that's unique to Alexandria. I've worked in several other great cities before. That doesn't exist at the same level as it exists here. And then the second piece of that is the amazing community organizations that we have. The amount of successful work that can be done to help our residents. A lot of that happens at the nonprofit and community organization level, and that's fantastic because we only have so many resources, we only have so many people to help do that. And in this city, those are the 2 really special things that I found. And during my budget process, that comes through on a very regular basis when we talk to people. They know the ins and outs of what a budget is and how it works, and they know the nuance of cash capital and debt service. So you have to be on your game when you're explaining it.
I saw you and some city staff outside today at a tent in Market Square answering questions from the public about the budget, and it looked like y'all were pretty busy with folks coming by.
Yeah, that was called the Budget Bonanza. I take no ownership of the name, but it was really fascinating. Again, just trying to find different ways for us to have some informal conversations about what the budget can do to help our residents and our employees. So I think there was a lot of people that care about that, and this was a couple hours and a beautiful day, and we got a chance to just really talk about things that people are interested in and where does it fit in the budget priority and perhaps where we have some gaps.
So if you're a resident of Alexandria who isn't as tapped into everything going on in the city, who hasn't been watching all of the budget public hearings or work sessions, could you explain to that person, how is the city budget put together each year? When does this process that we vote on in April this year, but usually in May, how does it start and how long does it take?
So it's a year-round, it's an ongoing process. We literally, our budget runs from July 1st to June 30th. That's the fiscal year. And so it's ongoing. The process that is followed is we start to receive information from our residents, from our businesses, from our council. That's the other thing that's unique about our city. We have a council that is probably more active than any council I've ever worked with in terms of just being out in the public and really trying to learn what people are experiencing. And that helps inform the council priorities, but it also informs the consideration as we start to prepare the budget. So big pictures, we get a lot of different input from residents, businesses, civic associations, people on the street. I live in Alexandria, so I get stopped and people say, hey, have you thought about this? I'm having this issue. That all really does get fed into. And then you have boards and commissions that are also really instrumental to the process, and they feed information to us. And then those public hearings that council works with on Saturdays and legislative sessions on Tuesday nights, that all starts to feed into the issues that we want to look at during the budget process. That gets coupled with a forecasting, much like in your own household. You look at what your needs are, but you also look at what income you have available to be able to provide that. And you combine all that to create a more formalized process that then feeds into using our department directors and asking them to look at efficiencies in their own departments, look at where they see needs, where do they see data and analytics pointing to patterns where we have gaps in what we're providing, or where perhaps someone else can provide that service at a better level. And then I formalize that and present that to the council. This year I presented that in February. And then the council takes that process over and spends 2.5, 3 months every week evaluating the detail behind every one of those proposals. And it's a very extensive process. I would tell you it's one of the most detailed budget review processes I've ever experienced. And I think at the end of the day, it really results in a great budget.
I appreciate you mentioning sort of as you move around the city, you interact with people. It's one of the things that I love about living here. I found myself in a budget conversation outside the Harris Teeter just a few days ago. I was locking my bike up when a leader of one of our local nonprofits strolled by, and there we were. We were having the conversation about housing affordability and housing funding. So that's definitely living in Alexandria. So you described the process. What were there any particular challenges in building this year's budget?
I've been fortunate. As you indicated earlier, this is our fourth budget together. This is probably the most challenging one, and I say that for a couple of reasons. One is, and probably the biggest one, is the uncertainty that is occurring at the federal level. That uncertainty, both in direction and policy, everything from application of tariffs that have a significant impact on how we look at our capital budget, the supply of wood and steel, which is integral to our cost structure for capital. Higher tariffs means higher costs. What can we afford to do? The uncertainty around policies that affect how we provide support for our residents, that all gets factored into this budget. And with that uncertainty, we've had to provide some caution and some room where necessary. The second piece of that is while we are an incredibly stable and strong community, we are growing at a moderate pace, and the bulk of our funding comes from property tax. And when that is moving forward at a glide path upward, which is what it's doing, is a nice solid approach, but we have suffered from the loss of office market in a significant way. So the amount of dollars we have is more challenging these days to use. And then the final one is inflation. You hear different opinions about whether inflation's up or down. I can tell you inflation's up. There's not a debate about that from the numbers I see and how we have to respond. So that's made it really difficult in the budget process. Having said that, though, I would say that this year's budget really builds on a lot of work that was done and a lot of the policies and new programs that were put in place in your first terms. And to me, that is really important because we're really at year 4 of a lot of those programs. And those programs in year 4 are where you're going to see significant actions, flood mitigation, climate action, strong environmental policies, significant progress on the state of good repair for some of our infrastructure, like our waterfront, flood mitigation. Those are all really, really important. So, while it's cautionary and challenging, it also represents a continued effort to make sure that we're doing a lot of the progress that was made previously.
Yeah, I appreciate, the way you approach the budgeting process because, as you say, we have been seeing rather marginal growth, and last year basically flat growth in terms of property values in the city, which was a very challenging budget cycle for fiscal year 2025 because we not only had flat growth, but we as a council decided to take on some pretty big requests that the public had brought to us in that year. And I, before I was on council, I was on BFAC, and I remember reading the revenue memos before the pandemic and how it wasn't never easy to do the city budget, but it may have been a bit easier when revenues were growing faster because whether it's providing services in our parks or teachers in our schools or police on our streets, the services that we provide this year are going to cost more to provide next year. Yes. And if our revenues aren't growing at pace with that cost increase, then we have to make tough decisions. And I know that you work very hard with all the budget departments to submit a budget that balances under the current tax level, and that requires them digging into their own files and finding things that either we don't need to do anymore or that we can do more efficiently, as you said. As people are watching with rapt attention the hours-long budget work sessions and the upcoming public hearings and town hall, what elements of this year's budget do you think they should keep in mind? What parts of it do you want the public to most know about as we move into the final stages of this process?
Sure. Well, it's a lot of detail in a proposed budget. As you can imagine, the budget is $956 million. So there's a lot of detail there. For those of you that don't study the budget like I do, I think probably the key points I would make is that we continue to fund programs and services in 4 very key areas at a significant level. That's youth and families. And that also includes ACPS. So, when we think about funding for our youth, we're thinking about how the youth spends 24 hours a day in our city, not just the school day. So all of that matters. So everything from early learning to ACPS education to out of school time to rec programs, things like that, that all help create a wonderful opportunity for our youth, which is our next generation, which I'm very excited about. So that would be one piece. Affordable housing is another. This has been one of the council's highest priorities by far. It's also an area that's probably the most difficult because it's the most expensive to try to address, and it can be addressed partially by new supply, which there are some new supply of housing occurring on Mount Vernon, for instance, right now in a significant way. And recently the council did some affordable housing with a conversion of an older office building that had been vacant for 21 years. But it requires tough choices. And I think that would be the other message I would have is that, you've got youth and families, affordable housing, a focus on public safety. We continue to fund those core services at a significant level, and fortunately with our collective bargaining in both police and fire, we have a strong workforce in both of those areas. You look at all those pieces together, and I think I would just say that we continue to provide great service and great programs, particularly in youth, affordable housing, and public safety as 3 key components. And I just want the public to know that we're doing that also with a very, very strong understanding of the fiscal policy and the strong fiscal principles here that protect our bond rating, shows that we are very stable, a great place to be, and not just today and tomorrow, but decades from now. And that's part of my job working with the council, is to make sure that decisions we make today and tomorrow don't negatively affect us 10 years down the line.
Well, we appreciate that, and you joining us here in our first interview segment. It's very exciting. We are also going to do a less budget and city manager focus section now, where we try to learn a little more about Jim Parajon as a member of our community. So Kirk and I have a few questions for you. Try not to think too deeply. Try to answer from your gut. I'm going to take the first one. I'll let Kirk take the second. So Coke, Pepsi, or coffee? If coffee, where in Alexandria?
You're going to get me in trouble.
That's the idea.
I'm more of a coffee drinker these days, and I love Misha's. I think that's one of my favorites. I have lots of favorites, and I think St. Elmo's is another one.
He's going to list every coffee shop in the city one by one.
That I would say those.
So, as you know, every year we celebrate the fact that after the Revolutionary War, George Washington came to Alexandria and had his birthday dinner at Gadsby's Tavern. if George Washington were to come to Alexandria today to have his birthday, what restaurant would you tell him to go to?
You're just asking for trouble. You remember, I literally live here and I walk here people are going to be very upset.
Or flattered.
I would tell you, there's just so many great restaurants. I love Italian food, so El Porto would probably be one of the ones that I would suggest might be a good opportunity. There's also Taverna, with more of a Greek style. Our newest restaurant is Founding Farmers, which I got a chance to try last night. So I'm going to duck the answer as much as I can and say that, and then on the west side, we have some of the most culturally diverse restaurants. They're unbelievable. So, I've been here 4 years and I haven't tried them all, but I make a big point of trying to do that.
Taco Bell Cantina, not even rating a mention.
Well, I do like is it the Baja Blast?
We are learning some things here, folks. All right, I'm springing this one on my podcast co-host here, but Kirk and I are both owners and riders of e-bikes. City Manager Jim Parajon, will you commit to going on a bike ride with us?
I would love to. I would very much like to do that, and I can tell you a funny story. You ask about relationships, so. I think it was my first year I was here. Both you and Sarah experienced, I saw this situation. And frankly, I've worked with a lot of councils in my day. Not a lot of them ride bikes. And sure enough, in two different occasions, I'm seeing Kirk McPike ride his bike to a council meeting. I'm seeing Sarah Bagley in a rainstorm, an incredible rainstorm, go to a civic event about a bridge opening. And I'm flabbergasted because I'm dressed up in heavy wool clothing, and I'm thinking to myself, this is just a different place. But yes, the answer, I would love to do that. I would ask that you be kind and gentle and maybe a little less on the hills and more on the flat space. But yeah.
See, the thing with an e-bike is you don't have to worry about those hills. As everyone knows, it is incredibly easy to bike east in Alexandria because basically you're just braking the entire way down. When you're going west in Alexandria, it is really great to have an e-bike to help you up those hills.
Well, we will take advantage of one of the benefits of being a City of Alexandria employee is your Capital Bike Share membership. So we will meet you at a dock one day and check out an e-bike and go for a ride.
I would love that.
That'd be great. One last question, I guess, is what's a book that you think that folks in Alexandria should read? Not necessarily about city government or urbanism or any of the stuff you do, but what's a book that's important to you?
Wow. I'm a voracious reader, so I probably read, even with what I do for a living here, which is pretty time consuming. I try to read a book every couple of weeks. There's just so many of them. I love mysteries. Probably the book that mattered the most in the last few years to me was President Obama's recent book. Just understanding how a person makes decisions at such a pressurized level and learning a little bit about leadership and your committed ethics and values, I think was really impressive to me. So I would suggest that might be a book in these times to read. And for kids, I love the book, Why Do Mosquitoes, I'm going to get this wrong, but hold on a second.
I'll narrate for the listener. City Manager Jim Parajon is literally looking around his office feverishly trying to identify the book on the shelf. He returns.
It's Why Do Mosquitoes Bite? Now, I might get that wrong, but it's a wonderful book. I read it at the Mount Vernon Rec Center to a bunch of first graders that overwhelmed me. They asked me so many questions. I thought I never had such strict conversation, but that's a wonderful book as well.
Did the first graders have a deep understanding of city budgeting and general fund management? I
will tell you, they had a very strong understanding of the community. That's for sure. Yeah. Maybe not so much the budget, but again, it was just great. It's a bunch of first graders, and they were just wonderful kids to talk to, and from every walk of life too.
Yeah, that's wonderful. We have We have great young people in our city.
Yeah. I recently spoke to the 8th graders at GW Middle School, and I said to them at the conclusion, it was a more grilling set of interviews than some of the civic associations or, local groups put on during the campaign. Our young people are highly informed and highly engaged, and asked a lot of really deep, powerful questions. So with that, we want to thank you so much for joining us in our second episode as our first interview subject. And for anybody who has questions that we can follow up with, perhaps, please let us know and stay tuned for our next episode.
Thank you very much, Jim.
Thank you.
Well, that was our interview with City Manager Jim Parajon. I hope you enjoyed it, and thank you to Jim for being our first subject. We can't wait to see you on a bike with us someday. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and stay tuned for future interviews. We've gotten requests for housing staff, for someone from Dash, for maybe some of our colleagues, so stay tuned on that.
And please, if you think this podcast was useful, if you find it interesting and you have neighbors and friends in Alexandria who would also love an inside look at what's going on inside the city council, encourage them to join you in liking and subscribing this and sharing it on your socials so that more people can get a little taste of the excitement that it is to sit through budget hearings in the city of Alexandria.
Keep us number one as the top-ranked city council podcast in Alexandria. And don't forget to send us your questions via email or on Blue Sky. Thanks all. See you next month.
Thank you.